Welcome to the What the Dutch podcast, where we explore bold ideas, tackle tough questions, and dive into the heart of healthcare and far beyond. My name is Dutch Rojas, and today I'm excited to bring you extraordinary conversation with someone I deeply admire, respect, and am lucky to call a friend. Dr. Paul Slosar is a renowned spine surgeon with nearly 3 decades of experience. He's also a visionary business leader, devoted husband and father, and someone who truly understands the complexities of risk and reward. He's also the co-founder in Physician Capital Fund, a venture fund dedicated to empowering physicians, transforming healthcare. He's been a valuable mentor in my own journey. Today's episode, we're talking about what it takes to become not only a great physician and surgeon, but how to balance ambition with a family, how to evaluate risk, not only in medicine, but in business and in life. Dr. Slosar is one of those rare individuals who can see the full picture, weighing both the upsides and the challenges with precision and care. We'll also explore the future of healthcare, the opportunities for innovation, the need for physician autonomy, and why fostering competition and collaboration is critical to moving healthcare forward. Dr. Slosar is a treasure, thorough, insightful, and deeply conscientious. And I promise you this conversation is one you will not want to miss. Now join me as we dive into a fascinating discussion. So tell me a little bit about your start. Here's some things that I'd like to, I think it's important for people to know, because what I've realized maybe in 30 years of this wonderful thing we call healthcare, people don't really know anything about doctors. Mm-hmm. So if we can just start with the basics and then kind of tell me the story of when do doctors decide to become doctors? When did you first go, I think I could do that? And then tell me a little bit about the journey, because people don't, I tell them, I'm like, the guys in school for 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
And then they're borrowing all the money they can and trying to get all the scholarships they can and all the grants they can. And people go, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's kind of important to talk about.
And it's funny, I believe I've read somewhere, and it was just, I think, one of those, hey, let's survey a bunch of doctors and see how did the question, when did you decide to become a doctor?
When did you decide? Yeah.
And I fell into the one that I believe was more the most popular. Around 50 to 60% of people who answered this survey answered that they were sometime either in late, grammar school to early high school. And some had experiences like their parents or their family members were doctors. Maybe they came from a line of doctors. I did not. I came from a line of teachers. My dad was a grammar school principal, and my mom was a teacher.
I love that.
And who stayed at home and raised us, during our childhood. But I have not a funny story, but I have a formative story. I played hockey growing up in Chicago, and I was a center. We had a really good team. We were first place. And so I, took the face off, pulled it back to our star defenseman, who was 12 years old and 6'2", way beyond his normal, his size. And he had a bad habit of shooting the puck high. I didn't see it. I turned around, and the next thing I know, I woke up on the ice, right? So I got a slap shot right in the face. And this was before you had to wear a face mask. There weren't face masks really, football.
Because you're super old.
Yeah, they were just a helmet and a little mouth. Anyway, so broke my cheek, my orbit.
Oh my God.
I ended up having to get surgery at the age of, I think it was 11 and a half or 12. So I had to have surgery to fix the orbit. I was in the hospital 10 days, and which in those days, was normal. You would just stay in the hospital.
That's still a lot, though.
They would stay in the hospital till your incision healed and you got your packing out. So anyway, I look back when people ask me this question, and I remember the day going into the operating room, because I was so young and naive. I remember going through all these doors, like the old Get Smart, go through one door, then another door, and every door got more and more serious as I'm heading into the operating room. This is, the hospital. Then, operating room personnel only, surgery operating room, the level of secrecy and sort of intrigue escalated every time. Maybe I was just, kind of naive, but I found that fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
And since I didn't have many people in my family, like I said, my mom and dad were teachers, so education was a big part of our lives. We didn't have, financiers, we didn't have, stockbrokers, other careers that I could, sort of tack to. And I was very good at science and would usually get great grades in science. And I didn't really understand like what a business person was. Like to me, like that didn't make any sense to me. But so I just tacked through high school and had great mentors, great teachers, people who started whispering in your ear, what are you thinking about? The career
Yeah,
counselor.
sure.
And I tended to take those tests well that said you have a good aptitude for this. And that kind of journey continued all the way through. But then it got super difficult, right? So you go to college, you have to perform well.
Yep.
You generally have to perform well in high school to get to a good college. Similarly, in college, you have to perform well, and you have to be pretty focused on science.
Yep.
Not exclusively, but you take a lot of science classes. You take a very important test called the MCAT, the Medical College Admissions Test, which is kind of a make or break test. Did well enough, apparently, to get in.
Yeah, to get in.
And
Sure.
then you get into medical school. So I went to Rush Medical School in Chicago, undergrad at Illinois. But now you land in this class of people who've all gotten into medical school.
That's right.
So, these are people who at least minimally test very well, and at the higher end are extraordinarily bright. Several of my classmates, extraordinarily bright. So then moving through medical school, I just thought I was going to be a regular doctor, quote unquote, a family practice or primary care, maybe because I like the intrigue, the intensive care unit. And my first rotation, third year, my first clinical rotation, because you do college basically extends 2 more years in medical school. It's just more science, more and more and more science. Then third year, you become, you get your coat and you go into the hospital.
Hospital, yeah.
And everybody knows you're a med student because they give you a short coat.
Oh, they do?
That's the code.
Okay.
So when you see a short coat coming at you,
Now we know.
it's not a
Yeah,
doctor.
it's not a doctor.
Even though people may call you doctor, the nurses know he's not a doctor. But that being said, my first rotation was on obstetrics and gynecology. And we had this great sort of archetype, very powerful, extraordinarily successful Black woman who's the chairwoman of the department, Patricia Boatwright. I still remember her name. And they interview all the med students your first week on the rotation, trying to figure out, who are you? Who do I have to watch out for?
Yeah.
Who do I like? Who do I not? And she sits me down in 10 minutes. She goes, yeah, so you're going to be probably an orthopedic surgeon. And I thought, like,
really?
It was like the Harry Potter, the
Yeah.
sorting hat,
Yeah.
I go, I didn't even know what, I go, yeah, I know what an orthopedic surgeon is, but, what's the, oh, well, you look like the type, you talk like the type, you're athletic, we'll see how you are in the operating room. And she goes, you should probably do a rotation on that. And so later on, I ended up gravitating and trying to figure it out. And I finally did start meeting the orthopedic surgery residents and their attendings, and they were all super cool guys. And one of them became my advisor. But when you go into things like orthopedic surgery or ophthalmology, ear, nose, and throat, there's only a few spots. So every year, the programs in orthopedics tend to take maybe 3 residents, 4 residents, and you might have 600 or 800 people apply for those spots.
So 600 or 800 people apply for 5 spots.
Now, that being said, those same 600 or 800 are applying to a lot of spots, but generally the admission rate in orthopedics is, in terms of the pool, it's about 40% that get it. So it's hard. I mean, so then it dawns on you, you have to do better than the other classmates in med school to be, to be selected, to be in that pool. So, you just continue this process. So now we are 4 years after college. That's medical school. If you get through in 4 years, some people don't. Some people take 5. Some miss their first year. They don't get in. Then orthopedic surgery is 5 years after med school.
Yeah.
So then you do it 5 years of residency. That's what that is.
So we're 9 years deep on this deal.
Now 9. And if you do a specialty training, that's called a fellowship.
Yeah.
That's a 6th year on top of your postgraduate training after med school. So I came out and I made it all the way through with no gap years, not gap. Like in med school, you don't usually take a gap year. A gap year gets forced on you if you don't get into something.
You don't get into something.
Yeah, usually you don't pause because you don't want to get left behind. But that being said, I think my first job, I trained in a fellowship. That's how I landed in San Francisco in spine surgery. I was 31, almost 32. First job.
insane.
Yeah, with no money, like,
Yeah.
legit no savings, no IRA, no 401k.
Nothing.
I think the most money, I mean, this is now late 80s, early 90s, but I think my top salary as a fellow was $35,000. So,
Yeah.
anyway, the idea is the dangling lure that keeps you going. Generally, you want to be a doctor, right?
Right.
Like so if somebody thinks, and I think that myth has been somewhat dispelled recently in the last
Yep.
10 years, that, doctors are really well off or it's a great career from a financial perspective. It certainly is. I mean, we do make very good money consistently over time, but it's so long to get there.
Yeah.
And my med student debt was nowhere near what these people are getting today. I mean, the average medical student's maybe $200,000 in debt at 32. They don't own a house. They have no retirement savings or much savings. So you start getting this dilemma of people. The only people who can kind of get through that either are, getting really good loans, grants, tuition forgiveness, or extremely well-off people, right? They can carry somebody through all that, carry a child or a sibling or something. So there is a challenge of the sustainability of the model. And if physician reimbursement, overhead, I think average physicians now make, if you go across all specialties, about $240,000.
I mean, that's really not a lot.
I mean, especially when you're on average 6 to 8 years behind your peers with savings,
Yeah.
retirement.
I mean, you as smart or as well as you guys have done in school, you could have sold software, could have been a software engineer. You could have been in the energy field. Like you could have done 100 other things and been way past, you know. I mean, because what I try to remember is, okay, but doctors were also really good at school. Like they were highly studious.
Professional students.
Yeah.
Legit.
And they're competitive. I mean, one of the biggest beefs I have is like, this is not the time to compete. This is the time to collaborate.
Oh no, we used to call in our medical school class, they might still use this word, gunners.
Oh yeah.
People who are trying to outgun the curve.
Yep.
Oh, she's a gunner, he's a gunner. That means, they're going above and beyond to humble their classmates by how good a score
That's
they're
right.
going to get on this test.
But the good thing about that is like, I think I only want to be around people that are better. So when you're around that kind of a competitive deal, you work harder.
Yeah.
Like you're tired, well, guess what? Do the work anyway.
Yeah.
You're hungry, so what? No one cares. Right? That's the real world.
No, I mean, it's easier in retrospect now because I have had a lot of success. I've worked very hard,
Yeah.
but people, as you're in your formative years and you're considering your career, financial security is important, but you have to love your job. I think the only way you have to love what you're doing, and the intellectual stimulation of being around really smart people all the time, solving often really complicated issues, right? I mean, there are, maybe half of the things we see are right over the middle of the plate. And then a lot of things are curveballs, right? So you have to have a lot of intellectual curiosity all the time, be on your guard. You have patients' lives under your responsibility, but the satisfaction that we get from patients is beyond measure, and it's a thing that I didn't realize until I would be chatting with some of my my college roommates, friends, etc., who went into business. Right, one was an actuary. He hardly ever saw human beings. He just sat in a cube and did equations. Another guy in insurance, which is fine, but like another guy was a stockbroker, right, a very successful trader, and they were hitting mid-career crises because they're like, am I really doing something that matters, like to my human beings? The connections we get with patients, it's a double-edged sword. We have a tremendous responsibility. Things can go wrong, especially when you do spine surgery. I mean, there are risks, and statistics bear themselves out. But the amount of feedback we tend to get over our lives on a human basis, the human-to-human connection, I mean, there's not many other professions I can think of that give you that level of, if if you're paying attention and you're not burned out and you're not
Yeah.
crazy about, you're getting crushed financially. So now I think there is this challenge that doctors are being employed. They're put on a much more business-like schedule, very, very, I mean, almost factory-like in certain circumstances,
Oh,
where
for
you have a
sure.
quota of patients to get through that day. And if you don't make that quota, you're financially penalized. It very much strips away the ability to have those connections, because you don't have the time, and you become distracted by the bean counters, right? I mean, because they pay your bills. They own your financial future in many ways. So, I practiced 28 years. I've seen the whole thing. I've seen the gamut of technology advance, the unbelievable, especially in spine surgery, orthopedics, but everything, right? I mean, look at what, pharmacology right now, it's unbelievable. Well,
So
expensive, but
like when you started in spine, where were we and where are we today as far as technology?
I came into my training for spine surgery, specifically in orthopedics, right at the cusp of using instrumentation. And what I mean by that is, if you think of, a broken bone, sometimes you put somebody in a cast,
Yeah.
but if you put a plate on that bone, some titanium screws and a plate, it heals faster. The person can get moving faster than, sticking them in a plaster pack. We did not have anything in the spine that we could fix the spine, which can be very unstable. So we would cast people. And
Oh, wow.
and I mean, I legit remember, and I'm not that old.
No,
but,
you're not.
but like, when kids had scoliosis, you would cast them and then cut the cast off, push them over more, cast them again, cut the cast off Then you would sometimes cut a hole in the cast and operate through the cast, because you didn't have any metal to put through.
Metal to put through.
And these poor, typically women, were casted. And patients who had spine fractures and instability, they were put in a brace.
Yeah.
Or, you remember the halos?
Yeah.
So we did that because we couldn't put anything inside the spine. So when I came out of training, all that technology was
Start
adopting. Yeah. And so that actually gave me this, because I was at a really cool practice in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of technology development going on, like everything out there. And these companies were spooling up, and they knew we were a good practice. We did FDA studies. We did a lot of clinical research. I trained like 28, 30 fellows in spine surgery how to do it. So we had this great, exposure to technologies. And that's when I started getting involved with companies that were building technologies. I would help them troubleshoot it. I would try them in surgery. I'd help them in the lab. We'd try to figure out the best way to do it. So, I was connected to, in my early part of my career, many companies, sometimes just as a consultant, sometimes more responsibility. And I rode this wave. It was really incredible to see. And almost all my best friends in spine surgery, who I could count as around 35 to 40 spine surgeons across mainly the US, some across international, all of us are that age.
Yeah.
And they needed that many kind of warm bodies and that many big thinkers and the collaboration. But when I think about the accomplishments that we've been able to bring to patients by having physicians engaged with spine companies early, and I look at some of the technologies today, many of them are way down the pathway before they think to bring a doctor in. And it doesn't make any sense.
So with the spine device companies, they really engage you guys early on.
Absolutely, because the funny, not the funny thing, but the interesting thing, the engineers, have the engineering capacity, right? So they come up with all these tools and these cool instruments and widgets, but then when you bring them into the lab with us, and you're like, hey, do you realize like the ribs are in the way, or the heart sits there, and they know it's there, but they're like, well, can't you just move that out of the way? And you're like, well, and so our ability to help them understand, okay, there's only one way to get to a certain area in the spine, or there's two ways. This way is much better, and this is why. The link between ergonomics, like is this too long? Is this too short? Does this fit hand? The angles we have to assume in the spine, because we're often moving around other structures. The spine's in the middle, right?
Sure.
It's deep in the front and it's deep in the back. So it's a hard place to get to. So the companies did involve us, and in many ways, I'm not the back of the napkin guy. I usually come in after the napkin sketch is done, but help a lot of development. But some of my colleagues are legit, brilliant inventors, right? 50, 70 patents. I mean, one of the most famous ones he was a surgeon, but it became very clear he was much more of a engineering kind of guy. And his name escapes me, but I mean, he sold his book of patents to, Medtronic and, made, I mean,
A
almost
lot
$1
of
billion.
money. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so anyway, the idea of riding that kind of wave of technological advancement, I was just lucky to be there at the time. And I inserted myself in, and I was good at it, right? If I was a crappy communicator or giving the engineers a bunch of terrible advice,
Yeah.
I would have been, moved aside. But now the industry in orthopedics, in spine, there's a tremendous amount of stability, commoditization. A lot of these things are now commonplace, right? People are getting total knees, total hips as an outpatient. Spine surgery, I mean, I did 30% of my cases at a surgery center in San Francisco. Like, when I came out of my training, every single patient who had a neck surgery went to the ICU.
That's right.
And I remember asking, like, why do they go to the ICU? They're like, well, it's the spine. I'm like, well, we lost 2 drops of blood and it took an hour. Like, I know, but you can't be too careful. So,
What was the impetus for that? What,
oh yeah,
like I remember, I don't know, let's call it the late 90s or early 2000s. I remember presenting to a bunch of total joint docs, and I hinted at the fact that we might want to do those on an outpatient basis. And I mean, you're 25, who are you? You're not a doctor. Like, it was all those things. And it was merely a question. It wasn't I'm a policy guy. We ought to do that.
like, hey, have you ever thought about it?
That's more of what it was, and there was a lot of pushback. So, and I think that's actually good, right? You want that because that's conscientiousness.
That is, yes,
Yeah.
that is good. And I think that as a profession, physicians tend to be very cautious and skeptical, right, about change. Because if you think about it, if you finally land on something that's working for you and a patient, and your outcomes are good, you enjoy that. Because when things go poorly, it's really bad.
Oh, that's tough.
It's really bad. It's bad psychologically. I mean, it's bad for everybody. So, however, that being said, some of us have had the opportunity of seeing like a little trailblazer. I would watch some of my colleagues who were saying, hey, I think I'm getting pretty good results. I bet we could move this to the next level of care. Like, could we do this as an outpatient? Could we send them home the same day? Do in the hospital, but send them home the same day. Could we do this instead of under a big incision, a smaller incision?
Yeah.
And then that engages the companies, and they're like, hey, let's develop something so we can see through the small hole, or let's develop medications that last longer, that we could block the nerve and give the patient 24 hours of relief instead of 4. So, there's this normal evolution, but in medicine, it tends to be very, very small steps. But when you look over time, it's meaningful. Sometimes in tech, it can be,
it's a hockey stick, right?
It's like a hockey
Yeah,
stick. So I would say that's good for the patients, but sometimes we are resistant to change just because change is hard. It's disruptive, and physicians, get set in their ways, and change can be threatening and intimidating.
Yes. So how did this kind of lead you to think about going to business school? I mean, you obviously went to a great school, one I love.
Yeah.
And then,
thank you.
then you made some jumps into tech. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was all part of the master plan.
Yeah.
And I've
Maybe it was.
Maybe it was somebody's master plan.
Somebody's master plan.
I humbly agree, but when I've had the pleasure of like mentoring some medical students and younger physicians, and I always said to them, it was consistent with like the story I just described about how to get from high school to medical school. It's just climbing a ladder, and sometimes you can see one rung ahead. That's it. Mm-hmm. And if it makes sense to you, go for it. and then get to the next run. Don't look.
Don't look too far ahead.
Yeah, I mean, because it's hard to do that, and it's hard to get there, and so I've always had this how should I say it, like this restless energy. I ran our practice at a relatively early age. I think they realized, number one, probably the senior guy didn't want to do it anymore, and number two, I was pretty good at it. So I was the practice administrative partner for our group for 13 of my 20-something years there. So I knew I was pretty good at business. The companies I worked with, I was very intrigued. I spent a lot of time with the people who were on the business side, because I would have, as a key opinion leader in medicine and surgery, et cetera, you have to be this liaison, careful, between your colleagues who are doing surgeries or taking care of the patients and the needs of the companies. And so I understood both sides. I spoke enough business to communicate to my physicians in physician speak, and I spoke enough medicine to communicate back. And so as I had the opportunity of working with a couple of medical device companies, I got this incredible opportunity to be the chief medical officer for Titan Spine. And that was an 11-year run where we had one device when I came in. One of my buddies founded it, a Wisconsin spine surgeon, mortgaged his home twice, legit startup, right? I mean, brought in a team. We had one spine
He mortgaged his home twice?
Yeah. And we, friends and family invested.
Yep.
I mean, you're going to your
You're going to your
neighbors.
buddies like, hey, I might lose your money, but I think I got something.
And so I came in, he asked me, to be part of this. I still was working. I worked full time. I only stopped practice 2 years ago. So, but that journey from one implant, 3 million in revenue, to 8 implants and almost 72 million in revenue over 11 years was unbelievable.
Oh, and what a ride.
And it got to the point where I almost had to stop practicing, and then the company was acquired by Medtronic.
Okay.
Which was good. Then I came back to a big company. They were the first company, it was Sophomore Danek. They were the first company I ever consulted with as a child surgeon.
Oh, wow.
Back in they're headquartered in Memphis, their spine division. So that being said, after that was in 2019, quite sincerely, I was just having a hard time keeping young surgeons in the Bay Area. Super expensive.
Tough.
The medical community there is tight, big players, really big entities, Kaiser, UCSF, Stanford, Sutter, right? And so
I mean, it's overwhelming.
And I'm a pretty good, I had a good reputation, but when you're competing against forces like that, the
market power's unimaginable.
Unbelievable. So you add that to the insane cost of living in the Bay Area. I could not keep junior surgeons would come. They'd practice for 2 or 3 years. They'd go from living in an apartment at their 30s or like, hey, it's time to get a house. And they'd be like, I got to go. And so that happened to me twice over 5 years. And so I kept becoming the junior guy in my practice at 56, 57. This was not in my script.
Yep.
My script did not include continuing to round at 4 different hospitals every weekend, Sunday and Saturday. So I knew I was good at this. I had a couple of friends who had applied to the Dartmouth program, the Master's in Healthcare Delivery, an executive MBA, but focused in healthcare. And I thought, I have enough experience to become a consultant and work in that space, or at least open my eyes to whatever else is out there. Just right before we met you. So I said, if I get into this program, I used my application as a bit of a binary decision, fork in the road. I said, if I get in, I'll have the courage up here to step out of medicine full time. And I was, almost 60, 59 when I applied. So I got in. I started, winding down my part of the practice, merged with a big orthopedic group, got my partners and my staff into a nice spot, and then stepped out 2 years ago. So it was a way of, I didn't want to be too old and too out of the loop where people wouldn't find my input useful.
Yeah.
But I also knew I wanted to put some formal education and training, accounting, finance, strategy, personal leadership, team build, they don't go over that in med school. So I found the academic rigor and the structure of the program to be tremendously helpful, and still I integrate it now in what I'm doing currently.
No, I talked to a lot of docs about MBAs, And, I don't know, maybe I'm a little biased, but I tend to say, like you really got to look at Dartmouth. It's one of the
Yeah.
only schools that has like it's highly compartmentalized for healthcare delivery.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's
And so if you look at other
the Dartmouth
programs,
Institute
yeah,
is famous. TDI,
sure.
it is a famous, and Dartmouth Hitchcock is a revered. It's I did not know this, but I'm actually going back to run a panel discussion back there in the spring. But Dartmouth Hitchcock is the largest rural healthcare system in the U.S.
I did not know that.
because you don't consider it rural.
Rural,
But if
yeah.
you've ever been to Dartmouth,
Yeah, it's rural.
it's 2.5 hours
Yeah.
out into the
Yeah.
countryside. It's beautiful. But when one of my classmates pointed it out to me, I was blown away. But don't. That is also coupled with one of the most obviously powerful academic institutions between Touch and Dartmouth Medical School and Dartmouth University.
You got a nice powerhouse of brain.
Yeah, I mean, and so that program was extraordinary because instead of just a straight MBA, and I looked at, and there's so for physicians watching, like you can consider getting an MBA, right? So that's a business school degree, but it's just a business. I don't mean just, but it probably doesn't touch about. Maybe there might be a couple of case studies in healthcare. It's typically a 2-year program, but you come out, you have an MBA. I've seen a lot of my colleagues do that, and then they just still are practicing. I mean, I don't think you need an MBA to run your practice. Now, then you can get a master's in policy or public health. I looked at some of those programs, but those are definitely people who want to maybe weave more into state or federal government policy or big institutions, FDA, World Health Organization, and I just enjoy the challenge. And I think the most opportunity is in healthcare delivery. Somebody made this comment at one of the conferences I was at that we have tremendous medical technology here. People come from all over the world to get U.S. surgeons, care, pharma, implants, et cetera, right? When you get the actual thing, they tend to be world-class products or world-class care. The healthcare system of delivering that care to its own citizens is broken. That's the part that really is where I'm trying to spend a tremendous amount of time keeping physicians independent, trying to help them stop from burning out, bring tools to them that can add efficiency. Like every other business has brought tools to add efficiency to their employees. Medicine is just lacking.
I keep thinking about how we met, and then because we met a short time ago, and I feel like you're one of my really good friends. And so the feeling doesn't have to be neutral. I'm not asking.
No,
I'm not a little fifth grader going, check the box. Will you be my friend?
I'm sitting here in your living room. I consider you a dear friend. And those tend to be the ones that I think, in my experience, unless you grew up with somebody from kindergarten on, but the people who you meet and connect with in a short amount of time often are the ones, especially at this age, that we just don't have time to go out and make new friends.
I'm not
looking for I wasn't looking for a new friend.
Holly knows when we moved here, I wrote a bunch of guys. I was like, we're all have kids the same age. And I wrote a letter and I was like, I'm not looking for new friends. But since we're all going to be forced to hang out, we ought to get together and have a cigar and talk and learn how to be nice to each other.
That you sound very much like, I started to engage who are now still some of my best friends from the San Francisco Bay Area around 4th grade, right? My wife.
That's right. Yeah.
That was, but up to that point, I was super busy and I wanted things to sort out, right? I didn't want to, but those people who we've met, the crew has fallen in together. We still vacation together and hang out. But
love that.
But you and I met at a big spine meeting. I think it was in Los Angeles just about a year and a half ago.
Yep.
And we were both on a panel talking about keeping physicians independent. You were talking about things like direct to employer contracting, forward contracts on insurance for surgeons to pre-sell their inventory of surgeries. And I was watching the audience, and my buddies had no clue what the hell you were talking about on that. So afterwards, when we chatted, I think we went and got a coffee, and then a coffee went to dinner.
Yep.
And but I found your perspective, and we had a mutual friend, Dr.
Yes.
Adam Brueggemann.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, okay.
He
yes.
said, you got to find Dutch at this
Yes,
meeting. And I
that's
said,
what it
oh, I'm
was.
going to be at the same
Thanks, Adam.
conference. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that being said, though, I think what we've done so far is bring a really nice dynamic relationship of you have the extraordinary, business experience. You're not a physician, which is good, so you don't think like one. You know many, and you do think in favor of them, which I find extraordinarily inspiring. That somebody who doesn't have an MD feels so dearly about trying to help the profession, and I do too. But I'm a physician.
Yep.
I should. However, the dynamic, duo of us, me helping you think around the corners or see around corners, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me, but when you tell that to my colleagues, here's what they're going to hear.
Yep.
And I think we help each other nicely in redefining ideas to try to help our colleagues, because we don't want every physician burned out. We don't want every physician quitting.
No.
And not every doctor should go to business. I mean,
No.
And I'll say this legit, and I've said it before. Do not think the grass is greener sitting outside of medicine. For all the challenges that exist, it's a great career. It is intellectually and morally fulfilling, and you make decent money. I'm not saying we shouldn't make more. However, when you get out and you think you're just going to drop into consulting or venture cap, it is a long and often very
It's a grind anywhere you go.
anywhere you go.
Yeah.
And you better, if you want, which is part of our, we're working on a few projects together, is helping docs who might want to frame that up, think about those ladder rungs.
Yeah.
6 and 7 ladders, ahead, but say, this is the next rung you need to hit. If you land on that ladder rung and you can hang there, now you get to the next one, right? I want to let them know it's not like from rung 1 to 6.
I love that story. I tell people, I mean, of course I give you all the credit, but I tell people, I'm like, listen, don't look too far ahead.
Yeah.
Just get the next step done. Just like the next ladder rung is good.
Yeah, and sometimes you're surprised. I mean, right? I mean, I did not anticipate meeting you,
Yeah.
but I was open to it. I did not anticipate being in Tulsa talking about
Nobody anticipates
venture
that.
capital. I love the architecture. I'm a
Yeah.
Chicago guy,
That's
so
right.
the Art Deco architecture here.
Oh, it's
as soon
beautiful.
as I walked downtown, I was like, this is fabulous.
Makes sense, yeah.
And but that being sincerely like saying, hey, sometimes the rung that is most appealing is on a ladder that's next to you. It's not on this same ladder. Like that's kind of what I did. I kind of climbed 2 ladders with my, consulting work and that, but it's not as easy now, right? Because there's not as much like new development in surgeries and stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're a spine surgeon, I think that, this is my 2 cents, the way to start thinking about being entrepreneurial, being a consultant, start thinking about the business side of medicine, the stuff that is really resonates with me. Think about what can you do besides just, if you're an orthopedic surgeon, just owning an MRI center or a therapy center. That's so 80s, right? It's like, it's great, but your partners all took a risk many years ago, and many of them built that stuff. Now, what else can you do to be independent, intellectually challenged? If you like the business side of it, what else is out there that is legal per se, and still allows you to drive excellent healthcare to your patients, and I do think the time is ripe. I mean, I think we're kind of at this golden age, and I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish, but like there's a tremendous amount of artificial intelligence layering into healthcare.
100%.
And I do not mean like whatever Elon's robot is going to be giving you your healthcare. That's not what I'm talking about. But the ability to make decisions that you make anyway faster and more accurately, and get them to the patient more quickly without a Post-it note on your computer, without you having to stop and do a literature search, without you, the ability to bring all this information and act with more comprehension of the space.
Yeah.
Somebody made a comment that medical information on the planet is doubling every 6 months.
I've heard that.
Like, how do you keep up with that?
You can't.
Most of us are frozen in our, when the day we graduate from fellowship or residency, we might do a few courses here and there and think we're keeping up, but
you can't.
You can't. And so where I'm going with this comment is I think there's this tremendous opportunity for physicians who want to be involved in unique payment schemes, direct to employer contracting, as we've talked about, run your own benefits.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about that? Like first thing I have to understand what it means. Just like I spent last night on a webinar explaining what is venture capital, right? I mean, it's a term, people understand insurance because we all buy it and we use it occasionally, but what about the people who are the ones running that business? You're smart enough, you're a doctor, you can do it, get your head around it. Take a minute and figure this out. A direct contracting with employers. I mean, orthopedics, spine, primary care, these large specialty groups, I think they're primed for that. And you've spent your whole career in that employer side. They're desperate for that, right?
100%. Yeah. So one of the things that I keep thinking about is how all of your experience led you to venture capital.
You led me to venture capital.
I am, well, I think listening.
I hit the bait though. Sorry.
Yeah.
I should be sincere. Right.
I heard for the last, let's call it 15 years, hey Dutch, how come I can't get into PE? How come I can't be a hedge fund guy? And I'm like, well, you can't. You can also be a REIT guy. Like most of the docs I met in the aughts and the early 2010s all got into the ASC game.
Yep.
And I thought it was.
I did as well.
Right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was really, really bright.
Yeah, I was a founding partner of one of Presidio Surgery Center.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
it was phenomenal.
One, you had two bites at the apple. One, you had a chance to build it yourself, right? Your partners identify a piece of land, let's put it all together, let's get it done, or find a building in San Francisco.
Right.
And then if you did really well with it, some management company
came in
and said, we'll buy a piece of that from you.
And
boom.
That's exactly what happened.
That's right. Yeah. And then if you got to keep some shares, then when somebody we had it happen when SCA sold or when USPI sold a tenant, all of a sudden now you had the third kind of bite at the apple. And these were wonderful things. And as you've said, young partners didn't understand that the old partners mortgaged their house. And they did things. I mean, I try to tell the younger docs, I'm like, look, when we were first in the ASC game, it was tough. Oh, yeah. Nobody wanted to invest. When I told the doctors, okay, I need $60,000, I mean, you might as well kick them in the balls.
Oh, yeah, no.
They were like, what? I'm not doing that. What's the return going to be? How do you know it's going to be that? What do you mean? How are we going to... And it was just this process.
Oh, yeah, and not to interrupt you there, but just giving, some perspective to make the point. So when I was, in my probably practice, let's say my 8th to 10th year, I started doing some consulting with SCA, with Surgical Care Affiliates. And I came in along with a couple of other surgeons to help them try to figure out how do we talk to orthopedic and spine surgeons about taking a risk to get into a surgery center.
Yep.
So, I consulted with them for quite a while and would have conversations exactly like you just said. I know it's expensive, but this is where it seems like the market's going. Doctors don't always understand projections about, markets. I mean, they get it, but they're very concrete, right? We're driven by results that have happened in the past. We look at studies that have occurred.
That's right.
It's a little hard to bet on a trend that maybe a McKinsey analyst or somebody says it's going this way, but it did. Then the next opportunity I had, as I said, I was a founding partner in a surgery center that we founded, along with a large group of physicians, but we all cut, in those days, a pretty big check to get started. Now, that paid off incredibly. I worked on the med exec team for that, so I saw how hard it is to run a business, cost conscientious you have to be, and the grindiness of the people who make these things successful. The docs, have somewhat of simplistic understanding of how much energy, work, risk went into those things. There was no guarantee. We actually almost got, wiped out because one of the large hospital systems decided they didn't like that, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so there was 2 years where it was very much on the ropes as to whether we would,
make it or not.
So fast forward to where we are now, circling back to the venture capital thing, the day you and I were together in follow-up conversations, you shared with me, I always heard about these docs who want to get in. I was one of those.
Yep.
I mean, and I lived in the Bay Area. Talk about venture
Yeah,
capital.
you're like, I'm here.
I mean, I vetted 3 or 4 companies for PE and VC firms, meaning they would call me. I would be a venture advisor. They'd say, we have this interesting company, we might invest. We want your medical opinion, good, bad, how will, and the questions they would ask me to answer educated me.
Yep.
Because I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, why would you care? I'm like, well, if we're putting money in, can't just be cool in the operating room. It has to scale. What are the barriers to market adoption? Who's the target market? Total addressable. These things that I'd never heard of. So I remember one day when I was really tired of being a doctor, I started calling some of these guys. I'm like, so hey, can I get into venture? I'd love to come on board. And they're like, well, we'll let you know. You're great. We'll call you. We appreciate your interest.
I think some of that is the guys like Andreessen Horowitz, Y Combinator. A lot of the larger funds had no idea the impact of physicians. And I mean it this way. Like, I would read these studies about direct contracting, and they would list 7 or 8 companies, and they wouldn't list mine. Right? Mm-hmm. And then, like, later on, I would have a conversation. I'd be like, well, why didn't you list my company? Well, we didn't know about it. You're not venture backed. Right? Yeah. And we don't really talk to doctor. Why would we talk to a doctor about a direct contracting company?
Yeah.
And I would have these conversations, and people, look, we know everyone, so people will text message you all these interesting articles and I'm like, these guys have no idea. Right? And so
you're just a cog in the wheel.
They're amazing at being venture people. Mm-hmm. They're amazing at tech, right? Like, I mean, they are. It's apparent when you live in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Right? They can attract billions of dollars. But my one piece of advice in the 400 or 500 meetings I ever had with venture was get the docs involved. Mm-hmm. And so when that didn't happen by 2023 or something, I think, I just kind of said, okay, well, I'm not a doc, but I want to help doctors, and I want to help young doctors especially. Mm-hmm. I heard it from a lot of med school students. They were like, well, I want to be a practicing physician, but I also am really interested in deploying what little capital I have towards early stage startups. Yeah. And this is really where, so you did a webinar last night. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about that and what your interest is in venture and kind of what we're doing.
Well,
by we, I mean you.
Yeah, and I mean, you had the idea. I hit the hook.
Yeah.
We're co-founding it. It's a big deal, and
we have some great partners.
And we have amazing partners, but what I mean by this is what you described in terms of the setup resonated. Yeah. I would have told you if it didn't. I would probably wouldn't be sitting here if it didn't. But secondly, I thought, if you look at healthcare as a market, it's 17% of the GDP, like $4.5 trillion. And as an industry, it employs something like 17% of all people in the U.S. are employed in one way or another in healthcare.
In healthcare, yeah.
But it's the most fragmented industry.
Yep.
For lack of a
better word. Sure. 100%.
So I'm looking at it both from the altruistic side, saying, I've heard the same thing. I was one of those guys, and I knocked on the doors, and I had experience. Like, I'm not, I didn't found 10 companies and, drive a Bentley, but I had real world experience. I couldn't get in.
Yeah.
Unless maybe I wrote him a $10 million check.
And then that's 100% true.
Yeah. So anyway, fair enough. And I know my colleagues in Boston, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, same way. So I said, to your point, I think there's so much opportunity. I think there's so much pent up demand. I don't see my colleagues having the same sort of direct opportunities I had with companies. And the upside, by de-risking your investments, if you write a single check to a single startup, the likelihood is it's not going to make it. It's a single roulette
I've done that a few times.
We all have.
Yeah.
And the idea, when I started diving into it, and I came out and met Tracy, spent more time, who's the general manager of 46 Venture Capital, and I understood the basic mechanics of it. The fact that if you pool all this money and you put a lot of smart people together who want to either be involved or just write a check, but also can be an advisor group, can de-risk the deals. They can look at this and say, hey, instead of just calling me, Paul Slosar, and maybe 3 other spine surgeons before a VC firm makes investments, what they do, 3 to 5, because we're expensive. And they're like, okay, we check the doctor box, like you said, but they run all the analytics on finance. But only the doctor boxes are just these random doctors they've checked, right? So that being said, now we can de-risk the deals. Made sense to me because we can get a bunch of, I can put a Zoom call together. So on our webinar, we talked about venture capital is a good opportunity because you catch the companies at the earliest stage and can capitalize on the highest, typically the highest valuation creation is in the early start of the company.
For sure, 100%.
They've outperformed the public markets, which was something I did not know. The private investment markets, including venture capital, have outperformed public markets for the last 20 years because they're not subjected to the same swings as the markets are. There's more risk involved, but you're paid a premium on taking that risk.
Oh, for sure.
You get a tax benefit. The capital gains are tax-free, which again, I'm like, wow. That's
most people don't know that. When I tell them that, they look at me like, what?
Yeah.
If
you hold the investment 5 years, which most startups take at least 5 years to get going. And then lastly, the idea of pooling your money, right? So you've got doctors who are not necessarily cash rich per se. A lot of their cash is tied up. But if you make a $50,000, $100,000 investment and you pool it with a bunch of other physicians and healthcare professionals, right? Because healthcare delivery isn't just doctors. We're getting other specialties in, strategy, sales and marketing, contracting people, executive, you put that together and you have $10 million to deploy, you can make 15, 18, 20 bets. And I don't mean that to sound pejorative, but you can put placements into those companies. So right there, if you're just a roulette player, if you've got 18 chips on the table, you have a better chance than 2.
That's right.
So the odds are in your favor, and the odds of making better investments because we talked to all the docs prior and said, hey, tell us why we shouldn't invest in this, right? Because we need to say no most of the time.
That's right.
The other interesting thing is, and again, getting a little grindy on venture now, is that when you look at people who might acquire the company that you've invested in, and this has been my experience without a doubt over 30 years of doing this in healthcare, the strategic companies who acquire healthcare companies typically don't buy a technology. They won't buy an app. They will buy somebody who's already shown market penetration, physician adoption in the healthcare ecosystem because they know how bloody hard it is to get anything into the workflow. So if you've got a pool of doctors and you've got 20 of them using the technology, troubleshooting it, bulletproofing it, doing a pilot study, doing clinical outcome, whatever the applicable use case scenario is, you're going to de-risk the exit.
That's right.
A strategic's going to say, oh, we'd love your technology, but we need to get it in the hands of a group of doctors before we make a decision. You say, I've got 20 doctors. Who do you want to talk to?
That's right.
People who've had exits in healthcare know that is in my experience, the single most largest hurdle to getting things acquired, which is what, if you're in venture, you want things to go from startup, market adoption, acquisition.
That's right.
That's the scenario. So that's what I was explaining to a lot of my colleagues.
This is what I love about doing venture with a bunch of docs. I mean, I saw it at the beginning. I was like, wait a minute. I have all these tools that I'm working on. I fly around the country, have conversations with you, talk to every single doc I know, and I go, would you use this in your practice?
Yes.
And if the answer is no, by 30 docs, then I go, well, I'm not going to found the company, and 2, I'm not going to invest in it.
Yeah.
But when all the docs go, when a majority of the physicians go, well, this is a really good idea. You go, okay, we have something.
Yeah.
All right, now let's go deploy capital towards it.
Exactly.
That seems like a winning solution to me. And I don't pay capital gains tax.
Yeah, and then, park that for a minute, which is, it's an investment, right? I mean, there's a 10-year fund. We have an obligation to do the best we can to get a good return for our investors. I'm an investor, I'm a co-founder, so, however, move that over to the side and think the community opportunity of building.
Huge.
So many of us are all scattered all over. We're nose to the grindstone. There's no chance to get together. There's no opportunity to educate my colleagues on finance, on venture, on other things, on networking. They don't really have time to network. So as much as we are doing this to drive an investment opportunity, which we think is real, or I would not be invested, but we see an opportunity to bring a community of networked physicians, start bringing in somebody from Andreessen Horowitz.
Yeah.
The amount of venture firms that are reaching out to me through LinkedIn,
It's humongous, isn't it?
they're like, hey,
Yeah.
we'd love to co-invest with your team.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, currently we're a little bit more venture than capital. So
Yeah.
once we're done raising, we will invest
Yeah.
alongside of these other entities that are, and I will draw them in because, like we said earlier, physicians tend to be lifelong learners. They have no exposure to finance and med school. They're afraid to look stupid and ask a question. Who are they going to ask, right? So we've got a general partnership of physicians who are all experienced in healthcare.
Yeah.
They've all practiced. They're not like from med school to MBA school. They're all, I would say the average physician in our group in terms of years practiced is easily 18, maybe 20. That's huge.
Yeah.
So they know what it's like to be a doctor, but they all have experience in business.
I think
And-
you've done a really good job with our GPs as far as they're all across the board.
Yeah.
The big thing you said to me a year ago was like, we can't have all orthopedics
Yeah.
and spine.
I
And
love
I'm
them,
like, I'm like, but. And
That's
then,
who I know, yeah.
But you were able to find us
Yeah.
a significant amount, and I love
Yeah,
it.
and I'll be very honest. Like that spun very much off my experience at Dartmouth.
Yeah.
Our cohort in our MHCDS class, the Master in Healthcare Delivery Science, was 44 people.
Yeah.
20 were docs,
Yeah.
which is good because if it's 41 out of then it's too many doctors.
Too many
right?
doctors.
Too many
Yeah.
opinions. They're all big bossy pants. So
Yeah.
but what it showed me was the healthcare delivery ecosystem includes physicians, and they should ascend to a position of leadership. They should stop being the cogs in the wheel,
That's right.
the last person we think of at a venture firm to talk to. I mean, we might talk to a couple, but
Yep.
but physicians, policy people, executives from various industries, device, pharma, nursing, dental, the ancillary health services, the finance people, the account, because somebody has to mind the books.
That's right.
And so when that cohort came together, and our study groups, as they pick, when you go to business school, you get a study group. I'd like the best study group: CEO of a hospital, COO of a hospital, an executive at Optum Healthcare, me, policy person. It was like,
I love the pods.
yeah,
I'm
I
still
mean,
friends with all my buddies.
and so it gave you a sense of how everybody has to understand each other's viewpoints in order to get ultimately patient care, right? At the end of the day, we're trying to get a patient through the delivery system efficiently and healthy. So, I think that theme is what drove me to try to put together the general partners. But we do need people who have business experience. We do need people who don't think, as physicians think.
Well, I know
It's
I talked to
helpful.
a couple ASC administrators yesterday, and I was like, they're perfect, right? Because that's what
Yeah.
we need. Like, we looked at a scheduling software for surgery, and I'm like, that's really tough, especially in an ASC environment. I don't know anybody that does it well. Half the time you have block time, and you're like, well, the case ran over 30 minutes, right? Which is like bump, up, up, up. Of course,
Oh, yeah.
we've had bad experiences where it's 3 or 4 hours, and the patients are outside waiting, and they're in pain. But nonetheless, I thought it was a really good product to get in front of doctors. But I also went to a bunch of NPs who run surgical scheduling. And I was like, what do you think?
Oh, great.
And then it hit me
Yeah.
like, well, they need to be LPs because they know more about it than I do.
No, I'm very dedicated to that. Number one, I think it just makes for a much more effective pool of investors.
Yeah.
To your point, there's just so many angles. It's hard to see around every corner. And one of my professors at my program, one of the classes I still find the most intriguing was about adoption, the adoption chain.
Yeah.
Ron Adler, and the chain. No matter where the weakest link is, if it breaks and you don't understand what motivates that link to either adopt or deny this, it doesn't matter if you've made it 98% of the way. If you know, I mean, every little link in that chain. I know this is not like revolutionary, but like doctors don't think about all. To your point, they know scheduling's a pain in the ass, and if it doesn't work, they go to their scheduler. But then the scheduler is going to know what monkeyed them up.
Yep.
You know, I could sit down and have them tell me, but I don't have time.
But like they know.
They know.
Yes.
And if you have somebody in as a limited partner and investor who has experience in systems, you know, in large healthcare systems and managing them, and you say, well, this is where this is going to go wrong, and has the company might not know about it.
That's right.
You say, hey, well, why don't you layer in? Would you like to advise the company? That's another appealing thing of our group, is that many of our people, physicians and others, want to help, and they might think, what am I going to do after my day job is over? And this is the way to get exposed to it. Like, this is how I did it. Like, I spent, 18, 20 years of these little projects, these little engagements. Some were bigger than others. One launched really well, but if I'm not fishing in that pool and learning the trade, if you want to understand how companies work, if you want to understand venture, if you want to open your own fund, this is the training ground.
This is how you do it. I think someone a long time ago said, Dutch, no one owes you anything. If you want something, you have to do it yourself. And I think one of the things I admire about you, Dr. Liz, and the rest of the GPs, and I'm sure the LPs feel this way, is we were in a world where venture said to us, kind of stick it up your rear end. We don't care about your expertise. And I would look at their apps and I would go, and I would look at their companies and I would go, but we could have saved you not even tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and you didn't listen, right? For whatever reason. I don't think it was anything mean. I just think they just immediately dismiss anyone with healthcare experience.
If the business plan looks good, I have a couple of funny things to respond, but I go, no, I mean this sincerely. Everything looks good on paper to the business people.
Yes.
Until the doctor and the patient get involved.
That's right.
Those variables are high. Those are high beta variables, as they say in business school.
And so I think the thing that we're doing here with the FICAP fund is we're saying, well, they didn't let us play, but we're still going to play because we know how to add value.
And we can play as well and complement you. We can be. I believe in the collaborative benefit of coming together with people who have experience, who have success in this space. They're very intrigued if we can pull this off. I mean, I feel strongly I'm dedicated to pulling this off. Like, I'm spending a lot of time and a lot of energy, but that's okay because it means a lot to me. But I really see that, I don't know that everybody sees, hopefully, my evangelical, rants. I mean, they're sincere. Like, I wouldn't be in this if I saw a massive loss opportunity here. The interesting thing, like you use one example, Forward, right? This company that just failed in the Bay Area.
Yeah,
right?
$600 million.
Yeah.
No doctors.
No doctors involved, right? Until
how does that
late,
happen?
they just sort of said, well, we'll stick a doctor in once we build the whole pod, whatever the thing, they're building a box, right, to take care of you. I mean, I'm not saying that a doctor would have saved it from failing, but maybe a doctor would have said early on in the investing, hey, have you thought about this?
No,
so,
you're 100% right.
But the broader brushstroke here is that, I think there's a lot of physicians who don't understand, and a lot of them are beaten down and tired and very, very busy, that you have potential that you haven't tapped into yet. Mm-hmm. And if you want to, get your head up and start looking, so looking down, looking up, we've had this conversation about a lot of our colleagues. I understand how hard it is to manage patients and run an office. It's brutal.
It's brutal.
But everybody's business is hard. It's not just doctors, okay? Like, excuse me, but everybody who's running their own business.
It's tough.
It is relentless, okay? Yeah. And so at some point, get over it, as it were, and make your path, if it's interesting to you, make your path with the opportunities that are available to you. If you want to keep beating your head against the wall about your relative value units, and you want to keep bitching about Medicare cuts, well, you're going to just be frustrated, okay? Because that is beyond your control. If you want to join a venture firm,
You can do that today.
cut a check.
We're
Get
ready.
involved.
We're
It's
ready
a
right
minimum
now.
investment.
It's not that
it
much
might
money.
be it might be your office's Starbucks budget,
yeah.
you know.
That's
but
right.
but my point being, take matters into your own hands, and
Yes.
the idea that, you know, the phrase of regain agency, and what I mean by that is try to look back and say, remember when you were younger, you were the shit. You're going to med school, right?
Yep.
The people still think that's a pretty badass thing, is to be a
It
doctor.
is.
I mean, when we talk to
Like,
each
who
other,
doesn't think that?
the
You know, I'm
doctors
just like,
all are like, it's no big deal. But let me just tell you,
It's a big deal.
go somewhere.
It's a big deal.
You know, when people say, what do you do? The thing that usually pops them the most is, oh, when you say you're a doctor or you say you're a surgeon. You know, you could say you're a venture capitalist, or like, they don't know. But a doctor is so tangible.
Yep.
And it's really important. So just try to regain that. We're trying to provide a community, an education opportunity, career networking opportunity, and a financial opportunity. That's what this Physicians Capital is all about.